Welcome back to Harmonize Your Life Conversations on Self-Care for Women of Color podcast with your host, Dr. Toni G. Alvarado. I am so excited about this season. Season 5 of our podcast begins with the month of September, October, and November. You all know we are on for 3 months and then we're off 1 month so we can creatively prepare for the next season. And I'm super excited because I'm also coming off of a 2-month sabbatical. Yes, I've been on sabbatical for the month of July and August. And I hope that you have enjoyed and gotten caught up on all of the podcast episodes that you have missed during our season break and during my sabbatical season. And so I'm coming back refreshed, renewed, and ready for more conversations to bring to you more information, more inspiration, more self-care strategies. Hopefully you will learn something. Hopefully you will grow and you will learn to practice better self-care, health, and wellness for yourself, for your family, for your community, and everybody that is connected to you. Listen, I am excited about our guest that's going to kick us off this month. I will bring her into the studio in just a moment. I'll introduce you to her properly, but I want you to get yourself ready for another empowering conversation on self-care with Dr. Toni G. Alvarado. We'll be right back. All right. Well, I have in the podcast studio with me today, Dr. Sienna Lee, and I'm going to read her bio to you because I know that once you hear a little bit about who she is, you will be very, 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 it would intrigue you to stay tuned and to listen in on this conversation. Dr. Seanna Leath is an assistant professor at the University of Virginia in the psychology department in the community area. She uses interdisciplinary approaches in education and psychology to understand and address issues related to the holistic development of Black girls and women in the context of families, schools, and communities. Specifically, her work focuses on how race and gender identity beliefs support psychological resilience among Black girls, and exploring the influence of discrimination and stigma in institutional contexts on the academic and psychological outcomes of racial ethnic minority students. Dr. Leath has 4 kids at home who remind her of the joy of the ordinary. And listen, one of her 4, she just recently gave birth to about a month ago. As a matter of fact, when I reached out to her and invited her on the podcast, she told me, well, I'll be just getting settled in from having my little one. And so the timing worked out perfectly for her to be with us on today. I am so excited to have Dr. Sienna Leath in the podcast studio with us today. I actually got to know her through her work, through reading many of her articles. She has contributed to so many articles and writings on the subjects of race and gender, psychology, and all of the iterations of identity formation and how psychology and how, as you read in her bio, as you heard in her bio, how racism and racial identity play into our psychological formation. And so I am so glad I invited her on the show today because we're going to be talking about a topic that's near and dear to my heart. It is actually one of the chapters in my book, Harmonize Your Life, A Journey Towards Self-Care, and it is called Overcoming the Superwoman Syndrome. And so today, she and I are going to be talking about this whole idea of the strong Black woman and this idea of the burden of strength that we carry, all of those things that can be injurious to us as women of color. And so, Dr. Lee, Sienna, thank you so much for being with us today.
No, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And I realized I should have sent the pronunciation. So it's Seanna, which is perfectly fine. But I wanted to make sure that I mentioned it.
Correct me. Yeah. No problem. And I like to say people's name right. Shauna.
It is Shauna. Yeah, my dad's middle name is Sean, and he was hoping that his first child would be a boy. And I was not, but they made me a junior by adding "nut," to the end of Sean. So
that is how that came about. It's Shauna. So I was calling it Sienna.
Mm-hmm. And don't worry, you were not the first.
Mm-hmm. I'm not the first? Okay, good. Well, I will fix that right now. Dr. Seanna Lee. Y'all hear that? Let's fix that. Okay. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm really excited.
As I said, I got to know you through your work. We've not met face to face. You are the second of my podcast guests who really, no, you're about the third or fourth of my podcast guests that I've met on social media or through the media, through your writing and just following your work. And it has been a joy since I've been doing this podcast now. I started the podcast last year in 2020, in February 2020, right before we knew we were in a pandemic. We know that the pandemic started before February, but we didn't know we were in a pandemic. We weren't being told that. And so so right before we shut down and everybody started having the shelter in place, I had already launched this podcast. And so I believe it came at the right time. I do a lot of work in, first of all, I'm a pastor. That's my principal work. And then anybody that knows me knows how serious I am about the issues of health and wellness and self-care. And in my own life, my own journey, I share a lot about my own journey. I'm kind of a workout fanatic. I love exercising and that kind of thing. And so I like to empower women around this whole issue of self-care, health and wellness. And after starting the podcast, after starting the self-care network that I lead, I also run a self-care retreat. And so all of these things flow together in what I do in this area of health and wellness and self-care. I also recently went and completed a certificate. I'm also a coach trainer, and I completed a certificate in health and wellness coaching because I really, really, really believe in holistic living. And I practice it in my own life. And I like to empower our people, particularly women of color, around this issue. So when I ran across your work, I was just so intrigued with your writing, and particularly your article, How the Expectation of Strength Harms Black Girls and Women. That was the article that really led me to following you and reading some of your work and your contribution, even in other academic journals and writings. This whole idea of strength and the expectation of strength on us as women of color and how that harms us as Black women and Black girls. So talk to us a little bit about you, your story. Why is this important to you?
Okay. My story, that is something. So I'm a first generation college student. I'm originally from Little Rock, Arkansas, in fact. And interestingly enough, I don't know if I thought about strength and taking it that far back, but now that you've asked it that way, I'm actually gonna take it even back to high school and finishing and going off to college, because I'd often got this message from teachers and mentors and friends, this notion of I needed to get out, right? And I needed to be the first in my family to attend college. And in order to do so, I pushed myself really hard in school, right? And I was in AP classes and I was in IB classes and I was doing all the extracurriculars and I was in sports. And so I think even that expectation of strength and that expectation to be excellent it can start early, and it started early for me at least, right? So then I went to college, and that's where I was introduced to research and thinking about the Black community from kind of a research perspective, and knowing, like, learning that I could be a professor and learning how professors, what degree they get, and the types of different things, you do as a professor. And so then I went to grad school. I'm at the University of Michigan after finishing undergrad. And that's where I really became involved in thinking more critically about Black women and girls, and thinking about our identity development and where we get the messages that help us just kind of figure out who we are, right? And think through, like, what does it mean to be a Black woman? How do I think about myself in the world? How do I understand my social positioning in grad school? And then just a couple of years ago, about 9 months before the pandemic hit, so that has been an interesting transition, I started my first position as a professor at the University of Virginia, which is where I'm at now, in the psychology area. And since then, this work has taken off so much. So it's so funny because the article that you mentioned, I wrote that when I was first getting started out here, and I was, just launching my own independent kind of data collections, and thinking about, what kind of questions do I really want to look at? What do I want to talk about with Black women and girls? What do I want to examine now that I'm a faculty member and I have more independence? And I was really interested in this notion of strength and kind of our constructions around who we are as Black women, and how Black girls are socialized again to, it's going to take a mantle. And I think, I mentioned even in that piece, strength is definitely spun as a positive. There's like a historical connotation to Black women being strong, and Black women being the pillar of our communities, in church, at home, in the workplace, in educational settings, as activists, right? Like, Black women have been so instrumental in social justice activism, and just pushing kind of the, like, healthcare and other things for the Black community, and addressing injustices. But then thinking, like, what does that look like in girlhood, and how early does that start? And I think the other side of the coin of strength is kind of this toll on our physical, emotional, and mental well-being, and really kind of thinking through, like, how do young Black women think about strength? And that's kind of where that paper came out, and some of the work that's going on in my lab. And since then, we've even started, doing work around, like, articulations of freedom, and more explicitly thinking about what does wellness and what does well-being mean to Black college women, and how are we talking about this early on with Black girls, and how are Black mothers modeling it for their daughters, for instance. Yeah, so I'll stop there.
I love that. And I love your approach, because when you say, where did it start? And you're right. When we look at girlhood, we often want to, because before we were women, we were girls, right? And so what happens oftentimes what happens in childhood? What is it? And you probably have you can probably quote this better than me, but I've always heard that by the time we're like 5 or whatever, who we are, the core of our personality and all that is formed in our early childhood, right?
Yeah.
And so the messages that we receive from a little girl, the culture, family culture, all those kind of things play into who we become as adult women. And so so we have to go back. That's why I appreciated the way you approached it. What messages are girls receiving, our Black girls, because we grow up and become women. And we carry those messages in the way we mother. We carry those messages in the way we live our lives, whether or not we are modeling holistic living or not. Sometimes stems from what was modeled in front of us as we were growing up. My daughter is 18. I'm sorry, my daughter is 21. I don't know what that was.
My mom does that too sometimes. She'll be like,
she'll be 22, and she just went off to college, and I went off to grad school. Graduated Spelman College this year, and and she just started grad school. And I sat with her the Sunday before we left to take her to school. She and I went to dinner, just the two of us, to talk. And one of the things I said to her was, going into this program, I told her, if you get there and discover this is not the right program for you, or you don't like being there, you can always come back home. And not that I didn't believe that she can do it, not that I didn't want her to do it, not that, of course, there was the mommy and me didn't want to let her go, but I would never hold her back. from
Mhm.
any opportunity. But the message that I was wanting her to know was,
Mm.
you don't have to go. We're already proud of you,
Mm.
and whether you don't have to become the number one this, the number one that, the first this, the first that. We love you no matter. You know what I'm saying? You
Mhm.
are enough right now. Now,
Mm.
does that mean you should not go after other opportunities? Does that mean this isn't a good door for you? No.
Mhm.
But I wanted her to know that if for some reason you get there and this ain't feeling right, or this is not what you feel like God is
Mhm.
calling you to be or you want to be, you can come back home
Mm.
and it will be all right.
That's beautiful. And a couple of things that I want to pull out from that even is this notion that within the superwoman kind of syndrome, part of it is this pressure to succeed, right? And this
Mm-hmm.
intense desire. A lot of times, Black women, Black girls, we're very motivated in many cases, right? To achieve in school maybe, or to
Mm-hmm.
in some places we are still the first, which is, a whole other conversation about how Black folks haven't been allowed in certain spaces. But
Mm-hmm.
a part of it is this concern and this fear of failure, or this sense that we're letting others down, letting our parents down, letting the community down. And then the other parts of the Superwoman schema, some of it is this obligation to suppress emotions, the sense that, maybe it sounds like you and your daughter were communicating very openly, which is great because she wouldn't have felt this pressure to not be able to say like, oh, I'm scared, or oh, I'm nervous, or oh, maybe this is too much, or maybe this isn't what I was expecting, right? Which can be really harmful when there's this sense that we're obligated to repress how we're feeling, especially if those emotions are uncomfortable, or they're considered negative emotions like anger or disappointment or sadness or depression, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which then also speaks to a piece of it is this resistance to being vulnerable. And some of that
Mm-hmm.
can stem from, if Black women, if say for instance, as a young girl or as a young woman, you did say like, I'm scared of this, or you hurt my feelings, or I'm angry about this. And then in response to that vulnerability, someone shut you out, or they said something harmful, or they said, oh, you don't actually feel that way, or oh, there's no space for that, or oh, you need to just toughen up, which boys get a lot more of the toughen up language, but Black women get it in particular ways too. And Black girls
Yeah, we
also
do.
get that message,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That you just need to be stronger. You just need to soldier through. You just need
You
to.
can take it. Mm-hmm.
Exactly, right? So that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of how that message comes across, that when you maybe repeatedly get those messages, whether it's unintentionally or maybe, parents that they're encouraging you to succeed because they want their children to be successful. So it can even come from a very good place, right? This
Yeah.
loving place of wanting your children to be financially stable and follow their dreams. But I think that, the part that taps into when it can become unhealthy or harmful is when you can't balance it with like, oh, I can still have these open relationships, or maybe I can change my mind, or I
Mm-hmm.
can make mistakes. And it's okay if I make a mistake, and I have folks who support me if I do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, that's part of why these conversations are still really important, to kind of destigmatize mental health and to talk about
Yeah.
Black women and women of color's specific needs. And when you were even talking about girlhood, the last thing I want to kind of mention here, and then I'll pause, is this notion that Black girls are adultified, which,
Mm.
specifically refers to
Say
the
more
fact
about that. Black girls are
that we're
adultified.
adultified, right? And
Oh, wow.
there's this great open report that was done in 2017 that you can just Google, like Black girls and adultification. It was done by Epstein and colleagues. And it
Okay.
talks about how, from a young age, even as young as 9 or 10, teachers and
Wow.
authority figures often perceive Black girls as being developmentally older than they actually are. And in response to perceiving them as older, whether due to their physical bodies or just because they have these particular stereotypes of Black girls, they expect too much from them. And when Black girls fail to live up to those expectations that are inappropriate developmentally, they might receive harsher punishments in school. They might receive messages that they need to be more independent, so they receive less support and less guidance from authority figures or for teachers. And we see this when we see rates of, for instance, like disciplinary, like suspensions, expulsions, which we know Black girls are an increased risk for these
Mm-hmm.
unfair sanctions. And so just really thinking about like, what does it mean for Black girls to have a childhood and to be perceived and treated as the children that they are? And how does that factor into mental health and thinking about our wellness into adulthood if from a young age we weren't allowed to just be children and to be free, and
Yeah.
to make these mistakes, right? And to openly express ourselves in
Wow.
different settings. So
Wow.
I think one thing that's
Wow.
really,
I never thought about that. The adultification of Black girls. I need to go and do more work, research and reading on that topic, because as you were talking about it, I'm thinking about me,
mm-hmm,
and I'm thinking about my sisters and the Black girls in my church. I'm thinking about, my nieces and
Yeah.
cousins. And you're right. It's so true. We are perceived to be older, or we expected to be more mature.
Yep.
And when I was 5 years old, my mom bought me a red step stool to reach the sink. And and that come on, it's the mom didn't. She was that it was like, you're the oldest, and I always heard that growing up. You're the oldest, so
Yeah.
you need to, you're responsible for everybody, and this, that, and the other. And you're right. And I can remember even as a child, sometimes feeling like I can't go outside and play because I need to make sure, because mom worked outside of the home and my stepfather worked outside of the home, and I was the oldest. And a lot of times we were latchkey kids, we were home by ourselves. And because I was the oldest, I took a lot of the responsibility. And I'm not saying that to say anything ill of my parents, but it was just our reality. It was our reality. And so we live into those, I don't know if you would say stereotypes or roles.
I think it's roles, right? And I think there is a particular gender is a part of that, right? So you're saying like you were the oldest, you're also the oldest girl. So how often is that the case for the oldest girl if you have a girl in the family, in terms of maybe having to be responsible for siblings, or gendered expectations in our society about who does the cooking and who does the cleaning and the type of things we need to learn, right, as like little girls to be these women eventually who are running the household. And I think the other point that's really great that you brought up, in my work, it's never to villainize or to say anything negative, for instance, about Black parents or the Black community, because a lot of these, these stereotypes or this need for strength falls against a backdrop of Black women being pushed out or not being allowed into spaces, or if we take it back to the transatlantic slave trade and the notion of like Black women being forced to care, for instance, for their enslavers' children, or being forced to do all the domestic service, in the 1950s because they weren't allowed to do other occupations. And so even your point about your parents working, that makes complete sense. I was a latchkey kid myself, right? And so thinking about, so who could the responsibility fall back on? And then did your parents have the bandwidth to say like, oh yeah, I needed you to do X, Y, and Z to take care of your siblings, but then here you can go, be a kid in these other ways. And maybe that wasn't available. And it doesn't mean they didn't love you. They didn't do the best that they could, and that they didn't have a wonderful childhood, but it may speak to this notion of like, did you feel more responsible at a younger age, and how did you carry that forward into adulthood?
And my girlfriends and I were talking just recently. I went on a girlfriend trip as I was closing out my sabbatical, and we were talking. And so we on the way back, it was a road trip. We drove from Atlanta, and so of course, those kind of trips you get a lot of conversation in, right? When you're driving 5 hours in the car together, and so we're riding, and so we were just talking. We were in South Carolina, so of course, we went to Savannah, and so all around us are the reminders of slavery, the reminders of the slave trade, all of that, and our history of our people is so everywhere. You feel it even in the air when you go. You're from Arkansas, so you feel it. Right.
Yep.
And so we were just talking about, and one of my girlfriends, she was saying how strong her grandmother was. And we were just talking about the women back then and the things that they took, in relationships, like with men, with husbands or whatever. Maybe their spouse had another family around the corner, or a child outside of the marriage, and they might have known about it, but or they forgave and they kept on those kind of things. And so she was talking about her grandmother, one of the girls, and how strong her grandmother was. And so, I said, well, really, when you think about it, what else were they going to do? Like, they didn't have the options that you and I have in terms of, I'm going to leave, but where am I go? You know what I'm saying? And even when you think about, and this is not a pass for certain kind of behavior in our community, but when you think about even some of our men, our Black men, the psychological impact of slavery and the fact that they were being taken and sold to be on somebody's plantation to make babies. So to have the idea that I'm going to be faithful to one woman or whatever, the whole family dynamic, when you're being taken from one part of the country to another part so you can produce even children, you know what I'm saying? Just think about that. So our mindset or our norms of what the family looks like, some of that stuff is broken down because of the effects of slavery in this country that we're still feeling even today.
There's a book, and I haven't read it myself. I've only seen excerpts, and so I say this with the caveat that I've not fully read the book. This notion of like post-traumatic slave syndrome by, I believe, Dr. Johnson DeGruy, G-R-U-Y. Post-traumatic slave syndrome. And I think
I need to write that down. This is a book?
It is a book, and it was written, I think, in 2005, and then they revised it and released it again in 2017. But it starts to get at some of these notions that you're bringing up about kind of the after effects historically and currently for not only the enslavement of some of our ancestors, but also think about how does that factor play forward, even in terms of things of like parenting, for instance, or this notion that, you know, with some Black parents where they're like, oh, like maybe I'm spanking you or something to keep you out of jail or to keep you off of drugs or out of the streets or something, and how that can tie over, even tie back to this sense of like, I had to be harsh to actually keep my children alive, because if not, then white supremacists would kill them back during the Jim Crow era or even now, right? And so I think the book draws a lot of parallels. But in terms of thinking about strength,
I'll kill you myself before I lose you to the streets, or I'll kill you myself before I lose you to the police. Yeah. I hear you.
When you mentioned like you were sitting at that table with your daughter and you told her, you know, you have like, you can come back home, you have the choice to leave. I think that's even very freeing, right? This notion that like Black women have options and they can choose not to have to stay in the same situation. And being able to have that can be very powerful. I think when you feel like you have a support network.
Yeah, that it's so important. It really is. So when we talk about, you talk about in your article, the burden. You talk about, you state in your article that Black women are often described as superwomen, and we know that this is typically meant as a compliment and received positively when we're compared to other blatantly negative stereotypes about Black women, like maybe we're lazy or, you know, obese or loud or whatever. So when we hear the strong Black woman, it's often viewed and taken as a compliment. But you turn that prism upside down and you say that compliment can be injurious to us.
Yes.
And I talked about that in my blog post in July. It was in the middle of all the Olympics, the Summer Olympics, and all of the conversation around Simone Biles, and when she decided that she was not mentally in this, her headspace was not there to do this particular event, and gymnastic event, and the criticism that she came under. And so I that's when I really got introduced to your work and started following your work, because I started out in my response to that in my blog post, Superwoman is a myth. I reference you and some of your work in my blog posts, but you say this, and you really helped me understand that this is we take it as a compliment, but it can be injurious. In what ways? Why is this harmful to and for us?
Yes. So I'm going to start with, when you mentioned like the other negative stereotypes, again, we have stereotypes of Black women like the Jezebel being hypersexual, or the Sapphire, like you mentioned, like the loud and angry and emasculating Black woman, or the Mammy, like they just removed the image for Aunt Jemima off the pancake bottle, but that's kind of like the asexual Black woman who's large and darker skinned, and not considered attractive, and she caters to like white families' needs, right? And so, as you mentioned, compared to that, the Superwoman or the strong Black woman, and we kind of see that in like Olivia Pope on Scandal, or How to Get Away with Murder with Annalise Keating, or Michelle Obama, or Simone Biles, or Stacey Abrams, right? These Black women, either in media or in real life, who we look up to and who are considered role models, because they very much are. They're doing phenomenal things. They're incredible. But at the same time, it becomes injurious when it is too much or when we expect them to have superhuman strength. It's also a way that Black women and Black girls are dehumanized because they are not seen as simply human, as
Oh,
vulnerable. They are not allowed to just be. And to Simone Biles' point, as you mentioned, there was so much support. Now I want to also shout that out because there were so many folks in the Black community outside who were like, amen, like take that time for yourself. Do not
yes,
injure
yes,
yourself. What a
yes.
way to model health, and wellness for Black girls and all these other folks who are looking up to you. But you're right. There was so much backlash about how she just couldn't take the pressure and how she was making excuses and how, mental health is not a thing. And that is so unfortunate in the sense that she is already one of the most decorated gymnasts or the most decorated gymnast, and that she could have literally ended her career or seriously physically hurt herself if she had decided, I'm going to put myself on the back burner and
Yes,
continue to
yes,
do
yes.
this performance. And I think it was also this incredible moment where again she recognized and decided to act on the fact that she could make a different choice, even as she also
Mhm.
continued to support her teammates, right? So there was also
Right.
still this expectation of like looking at, well, how does Simone Biles acting after she decided to pull out? They're like, well, she was still so graceful because she supported her teammates. And so there still wasn't space for her to maybe just disappear for a while, right? Just
Yeah,
literally not even have to. And she chose not to. And then we also saw Naomi Osaka, right? When she pulled out
yes,
of some of the different
yes,
tournaments in there and she was fined. And so it's that same instance where it's like Black women being penalized literally for taking care of themselves when there's this expectation to know
yeah,
you all will perform and you will
yeah,
show up and you will complete this job and you will do this. And so I think, there's a particular amount of privilege in Simone Biles and Naomi being able to say, I'm not doing this and I can afford the fines and I am
yeah,
taking, some Black women in their daily lives, they can't just not go to work. They can't
yeah,
just not decide to follow
yeah,
through. But it was still these incredible examples of them making that choice and then being able to make that choice for themselves. And so,
yeah.
yeah.
And one of my sayings, or one of the things that I often say about self-care, is that self-care is an act of resistance.
Hmm.
And I saw what Simone Biles and Naomi Osaka did as acts of resistance in terms of, you know, this is my body, this is my mind, my mental health estate, you know what I'm saying? My
Hmm.
health, my physical health, whatever. And to take that back
Yes.
from someone, just you can't tell me if I'm up to doing
Mhm.
something. I tell you if I'm up to it. And
Mhm.
so I see that as an act of resistance. This whole podcast that I'm doing is on self-care,
Mhm.
Seanna. And so, how do you see self care, health, and wellness in us being able to overcome this superwoman syndrome? That's what we're talking about today. If you're just tuning in, I'm talking to Dr. Seanna Leath, and we're talking about this idea of the burden of strength that Black women carry,
Mhm.
the expectation of strength for Black girls and Black
Mhm.
women, how injurious that can be to us psychologically, emotionally, and maybe even other implications like relationships
Mhm.
and otherwise, in the way we live our lives or in the way we care for ourselves. So,
Yes.
how can we overcome,
Mhm.
or what are some things in your estimation, what are some things that we can do in helping ourselves and helping one another when it comes to this overcoming the superwoman syndrome?
I love that. I'm going to give some different examples because I think, it's never easy solutions. There is not a one size fit all, right?
Mhm.
So I think, for instance, as a mom, I have one girl, I have three boys, and with my daughter, like I want to model emotional wellness, and so I'm very explicit with her, like mom is feeling tired, or mom is feeling, frustrated, or mom is feeling happy, or I'm going to do this because it feels good to me. Giving her options, like you mentioned with your daughter, where it's like you can leave a situation and having those conversations very young, and taking her emotions seriously and talking them through and really working with her about checking with her body and checking with herself and learning how to make healthy choices, not only in terms of food, but in terms of moving her body and in terms of the friendships that she has and how she thinks
Mhm.
about relationships, right? So I think
Mhm.
that's, thinking about parenting or in family dynamics more broadly, not just parenting, but when we're caring
Mhm.
for Black girls or for children. I think in terms of overcoming in intimate relationships, so it's so interesting because I think there's this notion sometimes where they're like, oh, Black women they try to do it all. And, they want to do the cooking and the cleaning, and and for some women they do. And that's perfectly fine. Like, you decide how your household, your relationships run. But the other side of that coin sometimes is that I think in some relationship dynamics, their partners aren't necessarily actually removing burdens or responsibilities from a Black woman or woman of color, right? And so in that case, it's not necessarily that she wants to do everything. It is that she is left to do so many things that doesn't actually have the space to take time for herself. So,
Exactly.
maybe in your partnership, really examining, like, what all does she do? Let's talk about the emotional load. Let's talk about the physical load. Let's talk about cleaning and cooking, but also, is she managing, like, thinking through the household responsibilities or thinking through appointments and everything
And
on
it's a
how
lot.
it is a lot. And
It's
so
a
even
lot.
that, right? Like, are you actually partnering with her to remove some of that burden? I think in terms of even like for clinicians, for instance, recognizing kind of these cultural stereotypes where maybe Black women are coming in and they're very high functioning and they're still going to work and doing all the things, but maybe they are depressed, and having the training and the wherewithal to recognize just because she is still functioning does not mean that she does not need assistance in taking a step back and breathing and really focusing in again on, like,
Yeah.
how are you
Yeah.
doing?
Yeah.
And then, the other piece that I'll just mention this, and then, part of it too, it's not just on Black women to be able to overcome the Superwoman schema, because we have to have more social safety net and we have to have more community support, right? So it can't be, Black women aren't responsible for racism and sexism in the workplace. We're not responsible for our bosses making us invisible or making us hyper visible or treating us in these very, racist and sexist ways. And so or for instance, Simone Biles being, fined and Naomi being fined, like, they didn't ask for that. They asked to take care of themselves. And so the officials who were responsible and who did have the power to actually not fine them and say, you're right, take time for yourself. Like, we also have to have these structural changes where Black women are then in the position to be able to prioritize their healthcare without, for instance, sacrificing their financial well-being or their ability to pay bills and have a job, right? So part of it is like, let's focus on what you're doing in your daily life. And then part of it is also like, we just need more societal support for Black women to be able to prioritize and take care of themselves.
Yeah, that's good. And I want to add to Seanna, even structural, societal, systemic support, but then also putting ourselves in communities that are concerned about our self-care. One of the reasons I started the Self-Care Network was for women of color, so we can have a safe space where we can talk about these things. We can help one another with these things. We can support one another. We can give one another ideas, encourage one another. And so it's important that we put ourselves in community, holistic communities. I would say it like that. So that way, that's part of that support, and it's so important. It is so important. I'm just so glad that, and you're a young, I don't want to ask you your age on camera, but I know
that's
you're young.
Fine. No, I'm 30. I am 30. Just turned 30 this year. Lord.
You just turned 30. Some women don't like to tell the age. I tell mine every year because I'm glad for every year God give me, right? So I am 58. I just turned 58, so I'm old enough to be your mother, really.
You're right there. Yeah, I won't say my mama's age. She didn't say I could.
But, right. And so, but yeah, so for you, I wish, I'm 58, and I want to say this to you, Seanna. I wish I knew at 30 where you are now, what you know. I wish that I knew how to care for myself at 30 years old, 20 years old, 18 years old, 10 years old. I didn't know, of course, because that wasn't what we talked about. That wasn't our reality. No one was talking about mental health back then. Nobody was telling us that, to take care of ourselves. Nobody was telling us it's okay.
Right.
You can't, you know what I'm saying? But I came into this realization through getting sick, after working myself to death in ministry, working myself, trying to be a wife, a mother. I remember when we first, the home we live in now, it's larger than, I can't care for this home by myself and work full time. And I remember when it was a struggle for me to hire someone to come in and help me. I thought that meant I was lazy, or that I might have been thinking I was better than somebody else or whatever. But the reality is I can't do all this by myself. And I didn't even realize I was stimulating somebody else's economy by letting her come in here and help me. So, girl, when I got that revelation and got free, girl, please. So, but it took me getting sick.
Yeah.
And I'm praying that there's not anyone listening to this podcast today, watching us on YouTube or listening to us on Spotify, Google, Anchor, wherever you're listening to this podcast, that you don't have to get sick before you recognize the importance that you are human. You have human limitations, and it's okay. And you don't have to be good at everything, and you don't have to be the best at everything. And it's all right to delegate, and it's okay to rest, and it's okay to be sad, and it's okay to grieve. All those things. I'm going back on this month. My sabbatical is over. I just lost my mom in May, and part of my sabbatical was healing, start to begin the healing process of caregiving and losing my mom. But I know that I'm not over it. Just because I'm going back to work, I'm still grieving. Right. I'm still going to have days where I may not want to get out the bed, but you know what I'm saying? I might be functioning, but I'm still grieving. Yep. And it's okay. And I can cry and do what I need to do at the same time.
You can. Right. There's this great book by Sonia Renee Taylor, and it's The Body is Not an Apology, and it talks about this concept of radical self-love. And the other thing, in it talks about how our bodies keep the score. Right, our bodies keep the score of us not.
Say the name again of the book.
Yeah, it's The Body is Not an Apology.
Okay.
And in it talks about radical self-love. But I think, the other side of not taking care of ourselves is that, our lives aren't as fulfilling, or they are shorter. They are literally shorter. And thinking about, the society we live in, and thinking about capitalism and labor, they will literally work us to death, right? And then replace us with someone else. And so really inherently believing that you are worth it, like you were telling your daughter, just because you exist, and that you deserve goodness, and you deserve, rest and pleasure, and just finding out what makes you feel fulfilled in life, which can be your job, and it can be the many things that you're doing. You mentioned, you being in ministry and being a pastor, but also needing other things that include, the exercise and being in community with others, and finding and having, those girls trips and things. And so I just think, that's such a great message, this notion that part of it is really believing that you are worth it, that it is worth taking care of yourself, and then finding the ways, hopefully within your means, that you can do so, which will vary, for each woman, what they can do in their own lives. Yeah. And I love that you said you hired someone, right? Because there's this notion, like, I saw this quote somewhere, and it was like, we weren't put on this earth just to like clean and cook and work and die. No. And like, man, if you can outsource, and you're paying someone well to outsource, like, and you have other things that bring you joy and you're doing in life, like, go ahead.
There's an article called The Obeisance of Housework. I came across that article when I was working on my graduate certificate in women's studies at UGA, University of Georgia. And it talks about it in the article, how women are wearing themselves out with housework when there are people that can help us with that. People who are really engineers in their home that can come in and organize stuff for you. And I was just talking to one of my girlfriends. She just moved, and she said, I would never do this way again. She said, the next time I move, I'm paying somebody to pack my house. I'm paying somebody to unpack me when I get to my new house. I'm paying you know what I'm saying? Right. We wear ourselves out because we feel like we have to do it all, and we do not. There are people out here who are gifted at it, who are better at it than we are. And like I said, you can help stimulate the economy for somebody else by, hey, listen. So, it's just such a wonderful season of life that we're in that we're able to have these conversations. Because 15, 20 years ago, we weren't having these kind of conversations, not amongst women of color. Now, maybe our white sisters were having them. You know, they were hiring people and
they were hiring us. They were hiring us.
And everything else. But we, you know, but we weren't having these conversations and we weren't living like this. And so I'm grateful that we have these opportunities to do so, and that we can help other women. And even if you can't afford, quote unquote, to have someone come in your home and cook or for you or whatever, you still don't have to do it all. I heard you say, have those critical conversations with your partner, have those critical conversations with your children. You know, I can't do everything. I told my husband one day recently, he said something, and it was a joke, but we both laughed so hard. He said something, I did something, and he kind of was like, honey, really? And I said, look, I can't be great at everything.
Hello, good enough is still good enough, okay? Like, it does not have to be perfection. I live by like good enough.
Look, and you know, and those messages that these songs, you know, you are not every woman. No, I'm not every woman. It ain't all in me. It's not. I'm not every woman, and it's not all in me. And something else, I can't bring home the bacon, fry it up in the pan, and never let him forget he's a man. Some days I can bring home the bacon, but I ain't frying it. And if I fry it, you might not know you're a man because I ain't going there either. So listen, we have to budget energy, budget time. Yeah. You know, I talk about all those kind of things in my book. And I just appreciate you coming on here. Where can we find you, Seanna? I'm going to put up a couple of things here so that people can check you out. You're at the University of Virginia. University of Virginia. And you're in the psychology department there.
I am. Yes.
Okay. And you're on Twitter. We're putting up your Twitter handle there. You can follow her at Seanna Leath, Seanna Leath, Leath. That's for those that are listening. Seanna Leath, PhD, Seanna Leath, PhD on Twitter. And you don't mind sharing your email address if people want to follow your writings. And you can find her at Leath, UVA, University of Virginia, at gmail.com, Leath, UVA, at gmail.com, so that you can reach out to her. Listen, look her up, Google her writings. I'm telling you, you will be blessed. Sit down with your daughters, sit down with your girlfriend groups and get some of her articles and let's read them and let's talk about them. As a matter of fact, Seanna, if you wouldn't mind, I would love to bring you to the Harmonize Your Life Women's Self-Care Network and have you have a conversation with us in our self-care network. I have a network of women. If you're not a part of the Harmonize Your Life Self-Care Network, come on in. Join us there on the Self-Care Network. You can go to my website at drtonyalvarado.com. There you can find the link to join the Harmonize Your Life Women's Self-Care Network. And Seanna, I'm going to get with you offline and bring you to the network so that you can actually have live conversation with the women in the in our Zoom meeting, and they can ask you questions and share things, and you can kind of help us map out some stuff. Maybe we'll take one of your articles, read it together in our self-care network during tea time with Dr. Toni, and we can just delve into it. Yeah, that's my support group meeting. Tea Time with Dr. Toni is the support group meeting, and it's designed for the women who are members of the Self-Care Network. So if you're not a member, join, because membership has its privileges, and join the Self-Care Network. If you're looking, also listen, y'all, go to my YouTube channel and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'm on YouTube. This podcast can be viewed on YouTube. Every one of my episodes are uploaded there on my YouTube channel. You can find this podcast on Apple, on Google, on Spotify, And you can also find us on YouTube. And I really need to get my YouTube subscribers up. So y'all go there, subscribe to my YouTube channel so you'll always be able to know when Dr. Toni has put up a new video or podcast episode for you to watch or listen to. All right. Dr. Seanna Leath has been our wonderful dialogue partner for us today. And so I appreciate her for being here with us. And I'm just going to say, Dr. Seanna, I love you already, 30 years old, and you are doing it. And you're doing it holistically.
I'm trying.
God bless you.
God bless you.
God bless
Thank you
you
for having me. This was excellent.
Thank you. Listen, we'll see you again next week on Harmonize Your Life, Conversations on Self-Care for Women of Color with your host, Dr. Toni G. Alvarado. Hi, this is Dr. Toni Alvarado. I am so delighted about bringing the Harmonize Your Life podcast to you. Would you do me a favor? If you are enjoying this podcast, would you email me at hello@drtonyalvarado.com? I want to hear from you. I want your feedback. I want to know if there are any other topics that you are interested in as it relates to wellness, self-care, nutrition, or just overall bringing harmony into your life. Email me, contact me at hello@drtonyalvarado.com.